Daniel Cole, the quiet neighbor everyone thought was harmless, was hiding a terrifying secret. Behind his calm and polite image, he had built a dark plan that almost went unnoticed until police found his disturbing notebooks. At first, the pages looked ordinary, but inside were detailed plans for kidnapping and murder, complete with maps, dates, and escape routes. As investigators studied the evidence, they realized Daniel's sick fantasies were not just ideas. They had already started to become reality. Brookfield was a peaceful town, the kind of place where nothing major ever happened. People locked their doors more out of habit than fear. But everything changed one day when police received an anonymous tip about strange activity at an old warehouse. Expecting kids messing around, officers entered the abandoned building. What they found was far more disturbing. Hidden in the dusty corners of the warehouse were neatly stacked notebooks. Inside, officers discovered page after page filled with lists, diagrams, and instructions. These weren't random doodles. They were careful plans, organized with dates, times, and even names. The handwriting showed no emotion, just cold calculation. On many pages, a chilling phrase repeated, "The perfect act requires no witnesses." Scattered nearby were ropes, gloves, and sealed containers. Everything was organized and untouched, as if waiting to be used. The officers knew they had uncovered the start of something very dangerous. But what they couldn't tell yet was whether the plan was still being prepared or if parts of it had already been carried out. Police traced the warehouse lease back to Daniel Cole, a man who had lived in Brookfield for nearly 10 years. He worked at a printing shop, paid his rent on time, and mostly kept to himself. Neighbors thought he was just shy, but the notebooks and tools told a darker story. His financial records showed strange purchases, cleaning chemicals, hardware supplies, and tools he had no normal reason to own. Surveillance cameras confirmed his quiet visits to different stores, where he bought items little by little so no one would suspect him. When investigators searched his apartment, they found it unnaturally clean, with no photos or personal memories anywhere. It was as if Daniel had erased all signs of human connection. On his computer, detectives found hidden files, maps of isolated roads, building blueprints, and lists of potential targets. He even kept notes about people's daily routines, when they left for work, when they came home, and how long they were gone. The deeper the search went, the clearer it became. Daniel had been preparing for years, step by step, training himself for a terrible act. Investigators feared they were not just looking at a plan but at the signs of crimes already committed. Then came the most disturbing discovery. On his computer, police found homemade simulation videos. Daniel had created digital models of different locations, practicing how fast he could move, how to avoid being seen, and how long it would take to escape. It was like watching a criminal rehearse his moves before acting them out in real life. These videos proved he wasn't just dreaming, he was preparing. Equally unsettling were the online forums he frequented under a false identity. Detectives found years of posts where Daniel sought advice, traded ideas, and shared fragments of his plans with strangers who seemed to encourage his fantasies. Some of his comments described methods of restraint, while others detailed substances that could incapacitate a victim quickly. Although many replies treated his words as mere fiction, Daniel's tone never carried the exaggeration of someone pretending. His posts were calm, methodical, and disturbingly real. The investigation team realized they were racing against time. Every file, every note, every simulation pointed toward action rather than imagination. Yet they had no proof of when or where Daniel planned to strike. The possibility that he had already acted loomed heavily over them. Detectives began cross-referencing missing persons cases with the dates in Daniel's notebooks, searching for overlap. Patterns started to emerge. 2 disappearances in the past year lined up too closely with his documented timelines to be coincidence. What had begun as the discovery of disturbing notes in a dusty warehouse was now shaping into something much darker. Daniel was no longer just a man with twisted thoughts. He was a predator who had studied, planned, and possibly already tested his methods in real life. The evidence was mounting, and the clock was ticking. As detectives pushed further into the investigation, the missing persons cases became impossible to ignore. 2 young women, reported missing within months of each other, seemed to match the dates scribbled inside Daniel Cole's notebooks. Both had vanished without a trace, leaving behind families desperate for answers and investigators frustrated by the lack of physical evidence. At the time, the disappearances were treated as isolated incidents, But now, with Daniel's detailed records in hand, they looked alarmingly connected. Each timeline in his notes contained eerie similarities to the victims' last known movements, suggesting he had not only studied their routines but perhaps even rehearsed his actions before carrying them out. Detectives combed through hours of surveillance footage, hoping to connect Daniel directly to the missing women. What they found was subtle but undeniable. In one video from a grocery store, Daniel appeared in the background only minutes after one of the victims was last seen. In another, a camera near a bus stop captured his car passing slowly by on the same night the second victim disappeared. Alone, these pieces of footage meant little. Together, they painted a picture of a man carefully circling his targets, blending into the background, unnoticed by anyone at the time. The hardware store receipts added another layer of dread. Just days before the first disappearance, Daniel purchased duct tape, heavy-duty plastic sheeting, and industrial-strength cleaning agents. Weeks before the second, he bought new locks and chains. Each purchase aligned disturbingly well with the timeline of the women's vanishings. Investigators now feared that what they had discovered in the warehouse was not the beginning of a plan but rather the continuation of one that had already claimed victims. With urgency mounting, detectives placed Daniel under constant surveillance. They watched his every move, noting how he followed a rigid schedule that rarely changed. Yet even in his monotony, they sensed calculation. He drove the same routes repeatedly, visited the same stores, and always returned home at predictable hours. To the untrained eye, it looked ordinary. To the investigators who had seen his notebooks, it looked like rehearsals, dry runs for something larger. The evidence was stacking higher, but what haunted the team most was the possibility that Daniel was preparing to strike again. His notes referenced something ominously labeled the final phase, a plan that appeared to involve more than a single victim. Time was running short, and every day of surveillance carried the risk that they were watching a man on the edge of carrying out his most depraved act yet. When the warrant was finally approved, investigators moved swiftly to search Daniel Cole's secluded home. The moment they entered the small, isolated house on the edge of town, it was clear that his public life of quiet normalcy was a carefully maintained disguise. The main rooms were spotless, almost sterile, with nothing to suggest personality or warmth. But behind a locked door in the basement, officers uncovered the true heart of Daniel's depravity. The space had been transformed into a hidden chamber, insulated with soundproofing panels and stripped of windows. The walls held restraints bolted into place, and the shelves were stocked with cameras, labeled containers, and stacks of recording equipment. It was less a room and more a constructed arena for control, designed with precision and patience. On a small desk sat a journal titled The Final Phase. Each page contained disturbing entries detailing the next stage of his plan, a mass abduction involving multiple victims at once. He had charted routes, escape paths, and even estimated the police response times for different scenarios. The calculations were exact, leaving no question that he intended to act soon. One page carried a chilling note. This time, no mistakes, no interruptions. It was evidence of both his confidence and his intent to escalate beyond anything he had attempted before. But the most horrifying discovery came from a locked safe found in the corner of the basement. Inside were identification cards, wallets, and personal belongings of the two missing women whose cases had haunted the town. Alongside them were strands of hair and small items clearly taken as trophies. These objects provided the undeniable link investigators needed, confirming that Daniel had already acted on his twisted fantasies and that the women's fates were as grim as feared. The recovery of these items turned suspicion into certainty. Daniel was not planning his first crime but building towards something even more monstrous. The arrest was carried out quietly but decisively. Daniel was taken into custody without resistance, his calm demeanor as unsettling as the horrors uncovered in his home. For the community, the revelations were devastating. The man they had known as a polite neighbor and quiet worker was exposed as a predator who had hidden in plain sight for years. His downfall was not the result of a single mistake, but of investigators uncovering his plan piece by piece before it could reach its terrifying conclusion. The case left the town scarred, a haunting reminder that beneath the surface of ordinary life, darkness can thrive unnoticed until it finally comes to light.